giving it a little more careful consideration, or not careful, no, it's inspired. Care had nothing to do with it. Giving it some inspired consideration, my son's second birth record constitutes police protection. That's the only way to properly interpret it, not as fraud. Because all of the agencies up and down that I contacted looked the other way, claimed it wasn't happening, couldn't happen. Well, that's police protection. What else would it be? Now, it begs a question. What's being protected? Well, we all assume that what the movies tell us. The people are whisked away on a jet, on an FBI private jet to some unknown location where they are given new identities. But, do you see where I am? This isn't prison, is it? I didn't serve any prison time, so what's being protected? But as luck would have it, the answer may be forthcoming or may be set up to be forthcoming in the form of reverse logic. Inasmuch as if I attack the police protection, now I become a felon. Now it becomes vindicated. The police protection becomes vindicated because I discover it and I attack it openly by sharing this new identity, let's put it that way, to the church that my son's foster family had belongs to, and the foster father is a past president of. So by attacking the police protection, now the police protection becomes vindicated to turn me into the criminal that the police protection had presumably been authorized to protect the individual from. In other words, a felon in waiting, a felon yet to be, a fellow yet to be a felon. And so the police protection was there in the form of risk assessment. Well, that's not enough of an explanation, obviously, to go to all that trouble, to commit fraud, basically. So, the question still stands. What or who is being protected? And it should be obvious, it's right there. Policy. Policy. Because I didn't break the law by running around naked or even just nearly naked, as a activist in LA. I was breaking policy. And policy is very serious. It's not criminal, it's serious. It can be made into criminal. They'll try to spin policy any which way they can to spin it into a crime. And they have succeeded up to this present time to some degree, mostly because out of ignorance on the part of the public, well, on the part of the private sector, you and me. Sorry, public had nothing to do with it. It's the public officers of the law who are spinning it the wrong way. So they can't get away with playing spin doctors like they used to. So it means they're being pushed up against the edge in acts of desperation. And one is to have my son taken so as to step it up, to make it more serious, so that now if I break policy, it's a higher offense, and in the sense that it's more readily available to put it into an area that nobody's familiar with and say, oh my God, now I'm a felon because I'm planning on kidnapping my son. No, I'm not. I destroyed the identity, the protective custody identity. I kidnapped that. That I've already done. So because I've already done that, they can claim that I'm to the unsuspecting private sector, you and I, like a jury. Oh, he was planning on abducting the body. That's what everybody will assume. When in reality, I've already destroyed the protective custody identity, the false identity under which the protective custody was occurring. So it's very fascinating, this ideology of reverse logic. Fabricate a lie so that if the lie should come under jeopardy, you are prepared to vindicate the lie and accuse the target with something else that will support the lie, because the lie is coming under jeopardy. So you've got to prop it up. What better way than to call me a felon, to call me a kidnapper? But who am I kidnapping? When you've got two identities on an individual, you can play games with people. You can, dance around it. All you have to do is ask a police officer, "What's your name?" And they'll never tell you. Well, you know what they'll do? They'll point to their tag. Well, is that their name? You see a last name, but that's their family name. It doesn't tell you what their name is. So there's always ways of steering around a question without answering it. And then you have to be savvy enough to say, "You didn't answer. Did you answer? You didn't answer my question. And you know what the question is. There's no need for me to repeat it. Since you didn't answer it, then I will answer it for you." And that's when you answer it. But, if they fail to answer, then you have every right to answer it for them and enter that into the record. But you got to catch them. You got to catch them. And they'll use every trick in the book to get you not to catch them, or not even to make it, enter it in as a record. In their world, in the public world. Not in you and I world, the private world. Because we're private citizens. You see me with a public bond? Come on. Just because I put something... I'm sure YouTube bonds what they do. So maybe what I post there becomes public record. But it wasn't public when I taped it in my room, in the privacy of my room, because I'm a private person. So you might say that the copy that's on the YouTube servers, maybe that's public record. Maybe. If it can be argued that YouTube is public entity, rather than a private enterprise. Anyway. So you have to be careful about reverse logic, because the conclusion becomes the presumed predicate for the predicate that's behind it. In other words, that the predicate that's assumed to be the cause of this presumed effect, which is presumed to be the effect. And rather than setting up the predicate, the conclusion is set up as a trap to wait and see if you'll fall into the trap and vindicate it while ignoring the absence of an actual predicate, thus substantiating reverse logic. So it's all very well and good, but it's good to keep in mind. Because, up until now I've been busy accusing them of fraud, when in reality there's no parents on that second birth record. You have to wonder why there are no parents, because there aren't any. At least not private individuals. If it's the public, so-called we the people, which is a public fiction, who are on that, birth certificate because it's protective custody, then there really are no legitimate parents. So they didn't really lie. They just didn't fill in all the blocks. And you can get away with it because nobody in their right mind would get away with trying to pull off such a thing. They wouldn't allow it. Not even a fancy schmancy attorney. Yet, there's something else going on, which may not be something done in the public. It may have been a private lie. Why are there two Connollys? And why is she married to both? I know of no divorce between either of them. So for all intents and purposes, it's bigamy. Is that part of this protective custody? Or was that a private lie on their own? This other Connolly, this Michael Connolly, that there is a marriage record to, and yet he's shacked up with a Joan Connolly. He's not shacked up with Donna Connolly, the foster mother of my son. So that might be a private matter of some consequence to the private parties, that they're trying to get something for nothing by fabricating a private lie. So so if you're going to accuse somebody, accuse them of the right thing. Because if you accuse them of something they didn't do, then of course the public will muster up all its force and accuse me of a felonious act, because the public is huge. The public is the machine. It's not the individuals who make up the machine. It has an existence all its own. Yet, it's fed by our compliance and our unwitting support. Because the next question gets begged, which I've already asked, but it's worth repeating. Because of reverse logic, and because of the fact that I have yet to have been a felon or a convict of some kind, you have to wonder, what is protective custody being executed for? It takes us right back to that question. If it's about policy, then I'm kidnapping a fiction. I'm kidnapping a policy. I'm undermining the whole machinery. I'm attacking the machinery. Because they're not protecting any private individual who actually stands in need of protection, or else they would have put me in prison by now. They would have convicted me of a crime already, ahead of time, before. They didn't. Now, maybe they do protective custody for what they think are like mafia thugs. Well, we don't have enough on them yet, but when we do, we'll take them in, it could be that kind of alibi. We've seen that in the movies all the time. Still doesn't justify it. You know why? Because I never, well, there's another aspect to this. We live in a welfare state, and a welfare law is being applied to me that doesn't apply because I'm not a welfare worker. Police are. They're welfare workers. When my ex-honey gave birth to our son, I told her, Medi-Cal is going to stand good on their paying your hospital fees. In some way or fashion, you're jeopardizing yourself by going into the hospital. Because I already sensed that Kyle was going to be confiscated. I just didn't know how to put it to her, to argue the case. So I told her, well, when an insurance policy pays for your bills, they have every right to tell you what to do. Because you put yourself under their care, and so they tell you who to talk to and what to say, or otherwise. In this case, Medi-Cal was paying for Samantha's neonatal care, and the climax was going into the hospital to have the baby, Kyle. So that puts Kyle under Medi-Cal, because until he's born, he's really not a recipient. She is. And coming under Medi-Cal, then that gave them the right to take him without equivocation and start this whole process rolling forward. Because up until then, he's just a placental mass. He doesn't, they don't think of him as a human being prior to the birth. We'll leave that argument aside for the moment. We won't go there, simply because I want to keep this discussion simple, this particular video simple. So I tried to reason with her. You're taking your chances. Of course, she didn't listen. Well, and they took him. So in a welfare state, you have to ask yourself who's paying the bills. And if you want your bills paid, then you suffer the penalty. Now, I was living under a trust, and the trust is no longer supporting me. It might be supporting my son's foster family for all I know, but that's a form of, could be considered a form of welfare. And I'm not making any case that I demand to get the money, because I know what's going on, so I'd be stupid to... At first I was a little frustrated, but, after a while I figured, it's what I get is retaliation. I get retaliation. But what is the retaliation? See, I thought it was a private matter. It's not. It's public. So in a welfare state, you have to be careful about making demands that you deserve your welfare, because then you're going to get the flip side when you least expect it, and that is the demand being imposed upon ourselves in which somebody else is dictating terms. And it's like, where did this come from? What does this have to do with anything? Well, it's called exchange. Contractual obligation based on you take the money, then you come under the authority of the money. That's the only way I see it. Which is a flimsy argument, but you have to call them on it, because then it's simply a debtor's crime in which you owe a financial obligation. It has nothing to do with performance obligations of any sort. And then you can claim bankruptcy, but which pretty much resolves the issue. That's right. I keep coming back to that. I think it's an act of brilliance, but I've been avoiding it. I wonder. Well, anywho, I'm not wearing this for any reason other than I'm trying to exercise my right to exercise my eyes and my vision, and certainly not to hide my identity. So, the Conleys stand exonerated on just one bullet point: that the second birth record is fraud on their part because they didn't institute it. So how can it be their fraud? And if somebody justifies it with police protective custody, then it's just another measure of protection. It's like having an accessory when you order a car to say, well, you want sidewalls, and it's an accessory because they can order it. Would you like to have this list of accessories? Oh, I'll take this one. Sounds good. Extra clout in case he should try to reunify with Kyle, his son. We can claim he's a felon. Under the second auspices of the second birth record, that's exactly what I think would be acceptable reasoning from their point of view. I'd have to give them that much from their point of view. Not from our point of view, but from their point of view. Meaning, it may not be generally true. It all depends how you want to spin it, which I've already covered, so I'm not going to go over it again. It has to do with reverse logic and who or what are you actually protecting, as well as from. You protecting policy or the individual? Oh. Interesting. Bit of a joke. And it's only a tragedy when we're ignorant. They don't cover protective custody movies that often, and so it's not like we're very familiar with that topic. And then to top it off, who would think it has to do with themselves? I mean, it's probably a very rare instance that anybody is the target of protective custody. It's no different than a restraining order that I already have against me. It's just different in that it's clandestine. It's not out in the open. Nobody asked my opinion. Nobody asked my permission. Yet, what if it gets tacked along with the restraining order? And they feel it's justifiable not to admit to its existence, like a hidden feature of a restraining order. Now that's a provocative idea. I could see that. But under the action of bigamy, all of this gets wiped aside. So this double marriage to two different Connollys, that in itself is bizarre, and might undermine the credibility of everything else. It might be the only way to go about this. Who is this Michael Connolly in relationship to Donna Connolly? Ooh. And why did they lie on their marriage certificate concerning her maiden name and birth date in a way that's very common among many people? Is that protective custody as well? So who are they protecting her from? Or him, for that matter? Or is this a hereditary thing? Well, it worked good with the other guy, so let's just continue. Do they feel like it's justifiable when you set up protective custody that you follow it one generation after the next? Could be. All channeled through Las Vegas. Now this is getting interesting. Why else would they be bigamists? I always thought it was to protect an inheritance against taxation. But if the inheritance is not private, if it's a public fund that's being paid out to sustain them, then they're living off of a nice, sweet piggy bank. So if they get protected identity with the second birth record, and they get protected income that's non-taxable from this prior marriage that has not been annulled or divorced by any facts that I never found in evidence, so it's two different protective custodies. One for financial and one for identity of a foster son. And it may have happened both at the same time, for all we know. Post-dated. Who's going to stop that from happening? That's what I suspect, is they both happened at the same time. Before we lost parental rights. Before. It was already getting set up. Hey, you want to do something, especially if it's a bureaucratic endeavor, you got to plan in advance. It can't be done overnight. You can rush it along, but, it's paperwork, All kinds of agencies and channels are involved. Well, I think I've covered every little angle conceivable. Interesting. Very interesting. Wow. What can you say about something like that anyway? Wow. Nothing according to normal reason, common sense reason, it fails. It fails. Because that's when all the normal rules of behavior get swept aside upon the urgency of validation of, oh, this is an emergency, so normal procedures don't apply. Normal logic does not apply. Well, exposing something is one thing, but acting on it is another. And if this is considered protective custody, then what angle would you take to attack something like that? There really isn't any that I can imagine. And so you don't. You can expose it, but that's, you don't attack it. Those are two different things. I was exposing the fraud for several years. I didn't attack until recently, and then the counterattack happened in retaliation. So, suspension of my trust funds, so it's flowing to me. So, exposure is a little different. That's why it's not against the law to expose yourself. Unless, of course, you act in a lewd fashion, because then you're attacking somebody, whether or not you had clothes on. That's considered sexual harassment all by itself. So nudity was never a crime in and of itself, because it has nothing to do with attacking anybody. Who's the target, If you're just walking around naked, you're not flashing anybody in particular, you're just being naked. So it's only when you attack somebody that a victim can be posed who needs protection. But in this case, it's a policy that's being attacked. And that is public policy against nudity, and a father starting a nudist family. Hey, everybody on my block in Studio City knew this. They knew what was going down. It had nothing to do with, the trust can't handle the financial burden that I'll be placing upon it. I'm so irresponsible, and then any other allegation that can follow thereafter, and which is what happened. Whatever my brother could cook up. But the neighborhood knew. They knew. And the police knew. They came and warned Samantha. We don't approve of Vinny starting a family. But they only came when I was away, because they knew they wouldn't be able to scare me. I'm an activist. My ex-honey was not an activist. So she fell right into the trap of fear. Oh, she still does. She's very prone to fear. Because she doesn't have a sense for reasoning, let alone intuition. And you have to have both. Plus, you have to have a third element. And that is the peace of mind, such that reason and intuition can kick in. Because if you don't have peace of mind, you'll be so swept by emotion that you'll be prone to think anything, either of your own devising or somebody else's or both. It'll just be a muddle. So you have to have peace of mind to be able to think this through and feel your way through it. Otherwise, your survival depends on peace of mind. It depends on it. It depends on it. And we're the only ones who can create our own peace of mind. Nobody else can do it for us. That's a fact of life. Hey, you know the joke? Go get a drink of water for me, Ha ha ha. Okay, that might wrap it up.